Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay, great. It's good to get some feedback from the room, and it's not a Zoom screen at last. Hi, my name is Max Fras. I'll be chairing this panel on the Generation Z in post-pandemic world. I have to apologize on behalf of one of our panelists. She's been momentarily held back, but they'll be joining us shortly. So, on the note of our panel, we will be looking at matters pertaining to Generation Z and youth in the post-pandemic world. We will have a cross-section of views represented by our panelists here. There'll be four people of our panel. To my immediate left, we have Dr. Kasia Makowska, CEO of Polonium Foundation. Welcome. We have Thomas Matthew, who's board member of the European Youth Forum. Hi, Tom. We have Paweł Musiałek, who is the director of the Analytical Center of the Jagiellonian Club. Hi, Paweł. And we have Robin Stewart, who is a youth activist and a student at the University of Glasgow. Okay, we will follow a similar format to the previous panel that you're familiar with. So we will be taking opening statements from all of our panelists, and then we'll be moving to questions from the floor and then questions from our online audience. And it will be also interwoven with a discussion between our panelists. Let's see how this will go. So if I can maybe ask Kasia for her take on the realities of Generation Z in the post-pandemic world in the context of UK-Polish relations. Kasia, over to you.
Thanks, Max. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the organizers for inviting me. It's great to be here. It's a great pleasure and honor to be part of this panel. So, as Max mentioned, I represent the Polonium Foundation. We are an organization that brings together Polish researchers abroad. So we are a diaspora organization sort of maximizing the potential of the Polish research community all over the world, including in Poland, and including also everyone who is interested in research opportunities within Poland or any Poland-related aspect of science and research. And our motto is turning brain drain into brain circulation. So everything that is linked to mobility and youth mobility and anything that affects it is extremely relevant to us. In our activities, we organize events, workshops, webinars to basically get together people who maybe would not be in the same room or in the same Zoom meeting if it wasn't for the foundation. Thinking about the younger generations, we are also hoping to launch either by the end of this year or in the coming year a series of career advice / knowledge exchange sessions, and hopefully also a mentoring scheme. So I'll be very happy to talk about that if you want to catch me in the break or later on. I must admit our main audience is students who are at PhD level or postdocs, so slightly older than Generation Z. But we do have a huge overlap with, and we work together with various organizations, with student associations, with student societies, including Polish student societies in the UK. And I believe our activities are also of interest for students who are thinking about their next steps. And we do see a big interest in people who are doing their undergrad studies or master studies. And after all, the students of today are the researchers or the workforce of tomorrow. I should mention that I am based in the UK, but our foundation is based worldwide. And we have volunteers all around Europe and in the US. But because of where I'm based, I'll speak, and obviously because of the theme of the forum, I'll try to speak more about the UK and Poland. And when it comes to Generation Z, I must say, because of my other day job, which is working in a law center that deals with migrants' rights, and my volunteering within that sector, as well as volunteering within feminist organizations, I also, on personal level, come into contact with younger generations. every day. And I think if I was to summarize Generation Z, maybe in terms of education, but not only, I would say it's a generation that is quite frustrated. It's a generation that is a bit disappointed by maybe the higher education that it's been provided. I don't think there is a feeling of that education is preparing people for their grown-up lives. There is some crucial skills that, or aspects of education that are missing there. And I think it's also a generational, somewhat generational divide. I think in Poland, especially my parents' generation and my generation, there was this sort of belief or almost a promise that if you study hard, then you will have a good life or a stable life. And I feel that nowadays, with the uncertain economic situation, with the very busy job markets, with the lack of promise of pensions, I think people in Generation Z are finding that that promise is no longer enough. I mean, of course, there is exceptions, like maybe people who go into IT careers, and topically also, I think, job careers around climate change, which are also linked to research. We see a surge of interest there, which is very interesting. But maybe I am biased here because I am talking about people who want to go into academic careers or get their PhDs and work hard. In that sense, I feel like they feel like maybe that advice is no longer standing. And I wouldn't be, it would be difficult not to mention Brexit. Another aspect of the Foundation's activities is also research. We have in the past done a very big report about the Polish research diaspora. And recently, we've also been looking at the attitudes of Polish PhD students and researchers in the UK towards Brexit and how that will affect their lives and their career plans. So maybe in the interest of time, I'll end here, but I'll be really happy to talk about that later on. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll definitely come back to you on the results of your survey. Thank you very much. Tom?
Thank you, Max. It is a huge honour to have the opportunity to speak to everyone here in Warsaw and to those that are watching on TV or online too. I want to make 2 points about Gen Z in the post-pandemic world. The first is about the roles that I think my generation can play as we recover from the pandemic and move on to other defining issues of our time. And the second point are the things that I think we need to change in our political institutions and democratic institutions to make sure that young people can perform the roles that I think we can play as we move forward. So the first role I think we can play is about mobilization. And across history, many of the world-changing events that have occurred, that have been sort of human-induced, I think have often been led or triggered by young people. And I think as we move forward, we're approaching a number of different crossroads, whether it's how we respond to the pandemic, whether we do go for something new or whether we end up defaulting to the old, whether it's with climate change and whether we sort of hedge our bets on that or whether we really step up our action, or whether it's things like Afghanistan and whether we sort of succumb to the fact that we have really failed over there or whether we unite across the continent in giving the Afghan people the support and the sort of energy that we owe them. And I think for me and the 40 million young people that I represent as a board member at the European Youth Forum, the answers to these questions are often quite clear, but I think to our political leaders, often they are not. And so I think as we move forward, I think it's absolutely critical that young people have a super sort of central role to play in making sure that our political leaders hear the sorts of messages that have been communicated by hundreds and thousands of young people across the continent for a number of years now. So I think the first role we can play as we recover from the pandemic is about mobilization. I think the effect of my generation's mobilization is an intensification and a clarification of what is required to make a more just, a more equal, fairer and more sustainable world. And I think if you look at some of the movements across history which have made the most progress towards a more just, a fairer, more equal, more sustainable world. I think you look at things like the civil rights movement in America, which was led and triggered by young people who saw unjust systems of racial inequality as something that had to go. You look at South Africa and the fight against apartheid and the vision of young people there to see a unified South Africa. You look at the climate movement today, which is an absolute phenomenal example of what young people can do when they unite across borders in fighting for what they believe in and for a world which is more sustainable, and that is in the interests of not just today's generations but also future generations. And it's in our long-term sort of strategic interest for those views to be absolutely central to our policy-making processes and to be at the front of leaders' minds as they make their decisions. I think this is what young people can do. I think it's what they've demonstrated across history. But I think there are a number of things that are sort of systematic features of our systems and our democracies which make it difficult for young people to perform the roles that they can perform and to be that pot of power which can help to unbreak the deadlock and move us forward rather than just ambling along blind to the consequences of our actions. There was a comment made earlier on about young people not being bothered to get out of bed to vote in the Brexit referendum. And I think not only is that attitude sort of wrong, it's also a major part of the problem. And I think if we spin that on its head a little bit, it's not always that young people are the lazy ones or the lethargic ones, but it's actually that our systems are not set up in a way that mean young people can contribute as well as they should be able to, and we need them to be able to. So I think three things we can do to help young people have their say in our political systems. I'll give you one local, one national, and one international example. I think on the local level, we need to invest in local democracies so that young people are able to be agents in their local communities. Young people spend the first 15 to 20 years at least of their lives in their local area. It's where they grow up, it's where they learn their values and they learn their skills and find their way in life. So it's absolutely critical that that context is set up in a way which enables them to grow into being change makers. At the European Youth Forum, we have a project called the European Youth Capital. This is a title that we award to cities in Europe who have demonstrated exceptional work in the area of youth policy and that have demonstrated a vision for the future that is bold and exciting and that enables young people to really shape policy and be central policymakers in those local contexts. And the 2023 European Youth Capital is here in Poland. And it's this kind of project which I think really helps to create change makers on a local level. On a national level, we need to take democracy to young people. It's not true that young people do not want to engage in democracy. Young people want to engage in democracy. The polls show that. But the ways in which our systems are set up make it really difficult. We need to take democracy to young people. This means digitalizing elements of democracy. It means reducing the voting age to 16. It means going to where people are. And in that way, hopefully, we can bring young people into national political debates much more than they have done in the past. And third and finally, on an international level, we need to find ways of breaking down the boundaries and the national borders that prevent young people from connecting and creating generational global movements of change across the world. Brexit's been mentioned a number of times already. This has created another set of barriers, but they need to be overcome. They can be overcome. At the European Youth Forum, we connect 108 different youth organisations from across Europe, which in turn represents 6,000 other grassroots and international organisations and 40 million young people. When our 108 member organisations come together in one space at our statutory meetings and they vote on our policy, which we then use as a basis for our advocacy, when we vote, these are the largest youth democratic processes on earth. And it's an incredible example of the power of young people and what they can do when they're given an opportunity to air their voice, and the power of also international representation as we sort of go forward and recover from COVID, but also tackle some of the other defining challenges of our time. So I think young people can be clarifiers, they can be intensifiers, they can be mobilizers. I think our systems need to improve on a local, national and international level, and I think if we do this, we will be in a much better position to tackle climate change, digitalization, the recovery from COVID, and I think when we do that, we're creating a world that is not just better for future generations, but I think it's in all of our interests too.
Thanks a lot, Tom. Paweł?
Raz. Thanks very much for invitation, and I will start with the economical aspect, because we discussed about the post-pandemic world. So, economical aspect is the first, maybe not the most important, but we should start with it. And I'm rather optimistic about that. I mean, if we compare the crisis in 2008 and crisis which is consequence of the COVID-19, we see that European Union completely react in the other way. And I think that that's a good, especially good information for young generation, because we all know that young people is a first people to be sacked from the job during the crisis. But in the situation that we sacrifice a lot of money to the young generation, and not only young generation, but generally transfer to our economy, I think that the economical consequences will be limited. Of course, we will see how long this pandemic will last, but I think this is a quite good information. If we compare the situation in 2000 and 2008, a lot of people on the southern part of the Europe describe this crisis as a last decade, because the young generation which go into the job market during that time see no jobs in Spain, in Italy, in Greece. So it was a huge problem which has political consequences. So this aspect I describe as quite optimistic. Second is less optimistic, is about political aspect. Of course, during first of all, I want to underline that I tell about Poland because I have limited knowledge about the other countries, and I think that we discussed about the Z generation, but we should understand and take into account that the people from this generation from different countries differ each other. So what I can see about the Polish society is that, of course, during the pandemic time, the politicization of the young generation is getting higher, and this politicization was huge. If you compare, if you see on the data from the CEBOS, the Polish public survey poll, we see that in the last 30 years, about 10% of the young people declared that they take part in the political protest. In the last year, it was 40%. So it's a huge rising. But of course, the question is, what's the consequence of that? Because the power of this protest was very strong. Of course, I tell about the protests regarding the abortion issues, but during the time, of course, this power was very strong. But after that, we see that the power is not visible. So it's not a stable power. And I think that a lot of people in the young generation feel frustrated because they, address a political message, and this political message was not nothing changed. So I think that the apathy is something which describes the situation, and the question why nothing happened, and the answer is demography. Because if you look on the young generation, how much people is in the, between 18 and 24, so how many people go to vote is an uncomparable number of people with the older generation. So for politicians, it's obviously that the voice of the younger people is less visible, less important, and this is the problem of young generation. That they first of all, the level of political participation in this generation in the last 30 years was lower than in older generation, and number of people in this cohort is lower. So that's pessimistic, of course, description, but the third thing is the even most sad, because I think that COVID-19 and this political protest which was happening in Poland show for me a very deep problem which is not described in Poland properly. I mean, we see that there is a radicalization and polarization between women and men in Poland. And the political consequences of that is young women want to vote for the left-wing parties. Young right men want to vote for Confederacja. But of course, it's more complex, but it's as a first choice. But this political choosing is not the most important problem. The problem is that was the source of this problem. And the source is that, and that's my main thesis, my main message, that generation is a iGen generation. iGen generation is a generation be socialized in a digital world and has a problem with the relations, which is very difficult, which is very and it is very important, not only for our personal life, but the social life as well. And I think that the political polarization between men and women as a consequence of the problem of lack of deep relationship between young generation, and this of course has a consequence of the relationship between men and women, and but not only, it's lack of not only deep relationship by means of love affairs and those kind of things, but it's lack of friendship, lack of other deep relationships. So I think that this is a very seriously social problem we should discuss, and we should answer the question how to help these people. But I think that the answer is very difficult, because if somebody was socialized in a digital world and socialized in a world where our relation is built in completely other way, it is very hard to just click like that and to build a true relationship in our real world, which is very, very hard, very difficult. And I think that the situation where in the young generation people expect more from others than from themselves, it is additional factors that makes me sad how much we can do to change the situation. So we shouldn't be concentrated only on the political consequences, I mean different political choices made by women and men, but we should discuss about the deeper layer of this problem, which is for me very, very, very difficult and not described properly.
Thank you. Robin?
Hi. So as you can tell from my accent, I'm from Scotland. So that's where I'm coming from my experience of being a Gen Z person. And I think that's important for me to say, because although I am British, I am also Scottish, and Scottish young people can sometimes very much differ from the rest of the UK young people. And I think we've very much seen that in the Brexit vote afterwards. I couldn't vote in the Brexit vote. I was 16 at the time, and Scotland hadn't lowered the voting age to 16 at that point. And the frustration with a lot of young people with the Brexit vote afterwards was quite immense, because there's a whole generation of people the same age as me that never got to vote in a thing that seemed to be such a big decision for all of us. And we never really got any part in the decision making, because there's basically no young people in the Scottish Parliament or the UK Parliament. And I think that's a really important point when it comes to young people in the post-pandemic and post-Brexit, because young people aren't in these political institutions that we know as traditional political institutions. And so if they can't see themselves in these political institutions, they will not want to engage with them. That's a fact. Young people are quite hung up on representation. And if I cannot see myself in a parliament or in a government body, then I don't really want to engage with it, because I don't think that they're considering me, or they're not considering my age group properly. And I think that's something that's an issue not just in politics, but in a lot of other places too, where young people are left out of the conversation because they think, oh, well, we don't care about it, or we're apathetic, when in actual fact, young people aren't being invited to the table because people don't think that we should be invited to the table, even though we do have, important ideas and important decisions, and we do have a part to play in society. But at the same time, we're not being told what our rights and responsibilities are as a citizen in these countries either. So how are we supposed to know how to engage with these traditional political institutions when we don't even know how they function or how to be a citizen? And I think that's why you tend to see a lot more young people nowadays will engage with non-traditional politics and activism. And you see that in, you know, the climate change activism with Greta Thunberg. And like you see that for me personally, I'm an LGBT activist. We don't tend to engage with a lot of organizations because honestly at this point it feels quite, like, I don't want to be bad, but it can feel quite useless at some like stages, and it can be quite hard because you don't even know how to take it to a parliament. You don't know how to take it up with your MP because you've never been taught how to actually be a citizen. And I think that's something that a lot of, not even just the UK and Poland, but a lot of countries could do better, is teaching the younger generation what it means to be a citizen of a country, but also to be a global citizen, because then they have the rights and responsibilities. They know what they can do. They know what they can take up to a government and be heard. And I think that's one of the most important things. As I mentioned, I'm an LGBT activist, and obviously that's like quite a big issue in Poland and the UK, but obviously I can really only speak on Scotland and the UK. Obviously the situation in Poland is quite dire in some places. I don't think that's controversial for me to say, but I don't think the UK can sit on its high horse either exactly. And I think this is something that the pandemic has shown, especially in like anti-racism, but also in dealing with homophobia, and especially in the UK, transphobia. And I think you're going to find that young people in these situations, they care about these issues so much, but they don't know where to put that energy. So they'll take it to the streets and they'll protest, but they actually don't know how to engage with MPs. They don't know how to engage with political bodies. You know, like, but they have a lot of pent-up anger. It's not that young people are apathetic, it's that young people don't have the knowledge or the education or the place to put their energy, because there is no place for that for young people. And that's very pessimistic of me to say, but I am a 20-year-old young person that's very politically engaged. But I could tell you when I was at high school, the amount of people that wouldn't vote in local elections was probably like the majority of my class. They just didn't care about it. They didn't care about who was going to, you know, look after the local council, and then they wouldn't vote in Scottish government elections. And I couldn't even give them an answer myself on how to engage in that. And I think that's the problem, because I didn't have the tools, because my school and outside of school hadn't given me the tools to explain to my friends why you should care about voting and why you should care about, you know, being politically active and going out and, you know, campaigning for things that you care about. But I think that Brexit, especially in Scotland with a lot of young people, has given them like kind of a bit of energy. Like, I think it's really hard to speak about it because Scottish young people, I feel it can be quite different to English and Welsh and Northern Irish young people when it comes to issues. We often feel we're going one way and we're getting pulled another. And I think young people face the brunt of that often. Like, I don't think that's wrong with me to say. Like, you know, it's things like that. I can't really speak for like you know, I can't speak for the rest of the UK, and I can't speak for Poland. But I think that's my main point, is like, if I can't see myself in a parliament and I don't know how to engage with a parliament, why am I going to engage with it? Instead, I'm going to turn to non-traditional ways of political activism. And whether that's, you know, the system or the way that the government's structured, it doesn't matter. If young people can't see themselves in that structure, they're not going to engage with it. So there's something to be said about representation, as well as reforming the structure of a lot of governments to take into account that young people are citizens. Because if in Scotland I can vote at 16, then I should be able to vote in other elections too. When I was 16, I could vote in a local election in Scotland, but I couldn't vote in a general election in the UK. And that's a real big issue. Like, why can't I vote in the UK government election, but I can vote in a Scottish government election? And, you know, young people are given all these responsibilities, but don't really know how to use them or what to do with them. And I think that's it. Like, just young people need these tools, otherwise they are going to become apathetic, and people do start to see us as these like lazy young people that don't really care much. But also at the same time, we clearly do care about a lot of these issues, because at the end of the day, I think with climate change as well, young people, for me at least, you know, it's hard to actually see the future in front of you when you think that nobody's doing anything about climate change and you feel like you actually don't have a future. So sometimes young people, I think nowadays, feel apathetic because they think, I don't have a future ahead of me because this planet's going to burn up before I even get a chance to get into a career or even start a family or get even ahead or get a pension or anything. Young people are pessimistic about the future as well as optimistic, and it's a contradiction inside of young people, but it's true. And I think that's why you see young people don't engage also, is because they don't see that they actually have a future. They don't know what jobs and opportunities they have anymore because of Brexit and the pandemic's kind of ripped that away from them. Like, I had my year abroad in France ripped away from me last year because of the pandemic, and then we exited the EU, and now it's too much for me to actually afford to go and do a year abroad for my degree. And I think that's appalling because a lot of lower income young people will never have that opportunity. And I'm just very glad that I made it here to Poland today, because that's a very important thing to me. I'm not a low income student, but there's tons of other people too that should be offered this kind of opportunity to speak on issues facing young people and how young people aren't apathetic. It's that people just don't want to listen to us. And I think that's the bottom line.
Thanks a lot, Robin. Okay, I was just trying to draw out common threads and issues. I mean, we had a sort of a research perspective, and we had a personal testimony, and we looked at what things look like in Poland and what things look like in the UK. But all of a sudden, it all feels very Polish in a way that we're all complaining a lot. And it used to be. It used to be, when I grew up in Poland, it used to be a national sport. Not so much anymore. I'm very glad to see this. And if you see the most recent Next Generation report on youth in Poland by the British Council, you see that Polish youth are actually quite optimistic these days. I have to talk to them and ask why. But if I try to maybe move on from what we're discussing now to the next part of our discussion, is maybe if we could look a little bit at what works and what solutions we have. And some of you have named it already. So Robin, you spoke a little bit about the issue of representation, and then Tom, also you talked about changing political structures. And if I go back to what's actually in the program and what previous speakers and panelists have already mentioned, so Sir Malcolm mentioned the issues of the pandemic and the climate change, which cannot be dealt with at national level, have to be dealt with across borders. And this is something that we can also reflect on in this room, as representing various countries and backgrounds. And if you look at the issues that young people face, in broad strokes, you would see a lot of commonality. So again, if you look at what young people in Poland identify as key issues or problems in their lives, and in Britain and other countries, you would see health, issues of health there. I mean, it's actually quite interesting that if you look at the UK data on youth, that what young people are most proud of is the NHS. I'm not sure how many Polish youth will be proud of the NFZ or other such provision. So, you know, health is important, but it's important in different ways, and there are different considerations. And the same would go for climate change and then issues of employment. So again, if you look at what's happening in Poland, there are a lot of discussions and ongoing concerns about economic freedoms. This does not really feature so highly in the UK public debate, at least on youth. And then you would see obviously the issue of education, quality education, and how this is related to the world of employment. So if we stay within those four areas, and maybe others that you're expert in, if you can maybe speak a little bit about what works and what your research or your expertise shows and what solutions we can offer. I mean, you can, well, Tom kindly offered this division into what happens locally, nationally. If you can already divide it into those, that's great. And then maybe later on in discussion, we can also look at bilateral solutions and maybe also broader. So obviously what we can do in the Polish-British context and what we can do internationally. And then we're going to move on to questions from the audience, if that's okay. So if I can do any responses, what works? Is there any optimism on this floor as to what we can do to actually address all the horrible things that... Because the other Polish trait, at least self-identified, is overcoming adversity. So let's try to look at that. How can we figure this out?
I can offer a couple of thoughts. I think while we are facing some of the biggest challenges in history, I think we also have a special capability to overcome some of these. And I think a lot of the time it can start small, and with showing people that you value them, you value their input, you take them seriously, and from that I think a lot can grow. So I'll give two examples of where youth participation has been done at a sort of gold standard level and what that has meant. So in the British Youth Council in the UK, they've been working with the Bank of England and the NHS to set up 2 youth forums, one Bank of England Youth Forum and an NHS Youth Forum. And throughout the pandemic, 2 of the defining challenges are health and economics. And throughout this period, young people have been in these forums, and they've been engaging with the leaders in the NHS and the Bank of England, and they've been consulting young people across the country and directly inputting to these leaders how the pandemic is affecting young people and other issues as well, so that young people's opinions are taken into the heart of these major British institutions. And I think this is valuable for a couple of reasons. The first is that it shows these leaders are taking young people seriously. It's not a case of complaining at young people for not taking part, but it's actually thinking about how can we include young people in our policy-making processes, how can we make sure that we listen to them in a serious and meaningful way, none of this performative stuff, but genuinely giving up your time to sort of listen to them and take them seriously. And I think when you do that, you build trust with young people, and from that, I think a lot can grow. And I think one of the problems nationally is the lack of trust that young people have in our political systems. I think in one of the Next Generation reports, one of the figures was 30% of young people trust in the UK government. And that is really low, but I don't think it's particularly surprising when you have political leaders who normalise lying, who make it a completely standard thing, who legitimise it, where overpromising and underperforming is the standard way of politics. Why would you want to take part in a political system where your leaders don't tell the truth, where they overpromise and underdeliver, where they make decisions that indirectly cause tens of thousands of deaths, where there are algorithms that decide your grades, which then prevent you from getting onto your dream university course because they hadn't been properly scrutinised. I think that the Education Secretary lost his job a few hours ago, so we're halfway there. But I think that is, if you take young people seriously, you engage with them, you listen to them properly, none of this performative stuff. From that, I think a lot of things can happen, and we might even begin to overcome some of the major challenges that we face.
Thank you, Tom. Paolo, you wanted to take the floor?
Okay, so maybe less optimistic view. Why we all the time discuss about the climate change, and all the time we stick this topic to the young generation, and we all the time underline that young generation is our future, and when the young generation go into the politics, everything changed, and climate change will be dealt with. So I am not optimistic about that, because I see the research made by, it was interesting, made by Krytyka Polityczna, so not conservative environment, but the survey was about how the COVID-19 changed the young generation's political stance toward many issues. And what was interesting in this document is how the COVID-19 changed the attitude toward climate change. And of course, if you look on the declaration, and it doesn't matter it is the left wing or right wing, everybody underlined that it's the most important problem we should deal with. But if we ask about how much cost you can pay to deal with this problem, the problem started. And I think that and what is interesting, the answer, I don't remember exactly numbers, but I remember that if we compare the older generation and the younger generation by means of how much effort we can put to deal with the climate change, older generation can put even much more effort. Even though in a declaration, the declaration poll, we see that not as many people underline that this is the most important problems. Why? And what was this source of this problem? I think that the young generation is much more individualistic, has individualistic mindset, and this is a problem. Even though we see that there is a huge process, I mentioned about that, especially young women toward left. The going toward left, it doesn't mean that we share the value of common good and we can sacrifice more goods to our communities. It's not working like that. The young generation is much more individualistic. They in Poland, they much more market-oriented. They underline that, for example, we should half 50% of the people in 1924 declared that tax should be not progressive, should be the same for everybody. So it looks. And even though this declaration is made by people who declared themselves as a left wing, so if left wing is orientation toward axiological issues, about the attitude toward church, attitude toward LGBT issues, that kind of things. But if we discuss about the how much money I can sacrifice, my money, not other people's money, but my money and my effort to sacrifice toward other people, I think that the young generation is not. We shouldn't put much hope to the young generation in this aspect. So, rather pessimistic. But if you look on the public poll, is a clear fact. It's
okay, I mean, it reminds me of the old story of a Polish optimist and a Polish pessimist. So when a Polish pessimist says that things cannot get worse, the Polish optimist would always tell them that, of course, they can. So that's anybody else would like to feed into? Yeah.
I can try and add something. I'm still kind of mulling over what you just said, Pavel, but I'm not fully sure I agree. And the one example that comes to my mind is young people during the pandemic. For example, students, so much has been asked of them, and they have sacrificed a lot, and they have done it readily, and they still have been kind of, portrayed as the people that go to parties and like destroy everyone's lockdowns. I disagree with that. I think they've done it, their years at university, their formative years, that a lot was asked of them and they really delivered. So maybe it's anecdotal, but here one contending point. But I wanted to add also from academic point of view, one thing that I see that is, or 2 points that I see that are positive. One is I agree that younger people are much more self-aware, and I think the consequence of that we see in the academic world is, for example, and also around higher education, is the conversations around well-being and mental health. They're being started by my younger colleagues. And I mean, there's still a lot to do in the academic culture of overwork and boundaries and so on, but these conversations are being had that were not had when I was a PhD student, for example, and talking about burnout and stuff, and I put a lot of hope in the younger generations there. Similarly, about equality and diversity, I do believe that younger generations can be the driving force there, and that's really great. And just another positive aspect around Brexit that is maybe not easy to bring up, but what we've noticed as sort of Polish students and Polish researchers in the UK when we were so frustrated with the incoming changes is we looked around and we came together with the Spanish researchers in the UK, with the Portuguese researchers in the UK, Italian, Dutch, and it was really great because we could come together and, share our grievances, but at least we had a united voice that was louder and more meaningful, and everyone was more ready to listen to it because we were more representative. So there is also an optimism there in finding your allies in unexpected places, maybe.
Great, thank you. And Robin, do you want to?
Yeah, it was just kind of off the back of Tom's point about the British Youth Council. In Scotland, we kind of have a similar sort of thing, except they're called Young Scot. And what they've basically done for the last few years is do these youth forums where they bring in these big companies or big organisations in Scotland, and they get young people to tell them what they think they should be doing better. So, for example, I'm on one for, this is completely different, but Historic Environment Scotland, that look after all the historic places in Scotland. And I've been on it for a year now, and we're just about to implement all the changes that we've asked them to make. So basically, you get a year with Young Scots supporting you, and you get to attend these meetings with these organisations. And I found it really beneficial as a young person, because I don't know if this is more like Historic Environment Scotland's got a very good company, but they were very good at listening to us and taking on board. And we wrote up this whole report with the support of Young Scot, who is like, you know, it's mostly run by older people, but these are people that are maybe like 26 plus, so it's not like a huge age gap, which I think actually makes a difference, because the young people that Young Scot looks after go all the way from your childhood all the way up to 25. So when you've got people leading organisations like Young Scot that are 26, 27, they know exactly what they're dealing with. They know exactly how to deal with these young people, because they were literally just in their shoes only a few years ago. And that can really help. And these youth forums that they do are really good. They've had ones on mental health and how the NHS in Scotland could do better with mental health in Scotland and approaching young people. And it's about them being that middle person for young people and these organisations, because then it kind of, you know, brings that bridge together that, you know, suddenly that gap that was so huge isn't so huge anymore. And I don't really know what the golden key that Young Scot has, but they do such an amazing job, and like I couldn't praise them enough, even though I'm a volunteer at Young Scot. But I think something like the youth forums are really important, and I think that's something optimistic, and it's something that you could definitely recommend to like any kind of country. It's something definitely worth doing, and the European Youth Forum obviously does a lot of that work too, bringing these organisations to young people and bringing young people to these organisations to start discussions about how their organisation could do better for young people and what are their concerns. And I think that's something that, you know, could be a recommendation for other organisations or countries to take on board.
Okay, thank you very much. I mean, there was some optimism there, but because I can't get enough of it from this floor, I thought maybe we can open it to you and see. You know, during panels, we normally don't encourage comments, but we will allow this if it's an optimistic one. So if you have something that will be uplifting and will telling us how things can actually improve, maybe at some point, that's great. Or a question to our panelists. We can maybe do the first round of questions now. Sorry, we have a lady at the back.
Oh, hi.
Yeah.
I'm full of optimism. First off, I think you all speak so brilliantly, and how could we not be impressed by the future when we sit and listen to people like you talk? Robin, it's lovely having you here, and you bring in the idea as well of the fact that the UK is, of course, made up of constituent parts, and what Scotland is doing is slightly different to other parts of the UK. You made a point. You said young people are given these tools and don't know what to do with them. I'd argue a lot of old people are given these tools and don't know what to do with them as well. So the theme that seems to be coming through from all the speakers is about education and the importance of really instilling from youth a sense of how to be a citizen and how to partake, how to be involved, how to get to the point where you all are now, where you have a voice and you are listened to. Because I do see a disenfranchised youth too. I see many that feel silenced and that there is just no point, they will not be listened to. So for educators like myself, how would you encourage us to instill those ideals younger? I mean, do we start when they're very, very small? What sort of things work? How can we do it?
Okay. Anyone like to take some of this qualified optimism and respond? We can. Okay, Tom.
I can kick it off. I think education is absolutely one of the fundamental things that needs to improve, and I think right now we have an amazing opportunity to do this. Education has been through a massive load of disruption over the past few years, and I think as has already been mentioned, young people sacrificed a huge amount in their education and also in employment and other areas of their lives too. But I think now the thing we can do is rethink how we do education. And I think for me, one of the fundamental parts of that is how we do assessment. And I know it's easy to complain about examinations and say they're unfair, they're not accurate representations of people's abilities and so on and so forth. The difficult thing is proposing solutions. But I think what the pandemic has forced us to do is to go to one extreme. So for me, I've had lots of long open book online exams, which are completely different to the usual much shorter, intense, written, closed book exams. And I think we can use what we've learned in different institutions where they've gone to different extremes to find the middle ground that best enables young people's abilities to come through. And I think a critical part of the curriculum, which is missing aside from how we do assessment, it is about citizenship education, as has been mentioned. And I think it's also true that this is not a problem unique to young people. I think the idea that everyone who is not a young person is able to perfectly understand who to vote for and what is in their best interests is kind of for the birds too. I think we all, as a society, need more citizenship education. And I think also our political leaders have a big role to play in terms of, first and foremost, telling the truth, talking squarely, being open and honest, living up to manifesto pledges, what they promise, so that we are in a better position to be able to judge who is best in our interests. And I think to go to the specific point about what teachers can do in the classroom, I think to inspire people that their voice matters, what they say matters, and that their views matter and need to belong not just in sort of classrooms where young people are given the opportunity to sort of contribute and raise their hands and so on and so forth, but that shouldn't end at the classroom. That should be the start. And when people go up into adulthood and into the rest of the society, it should be normalised that they are expected to sort of give their opinions, to stand up. But I also think it should be an expectation that our leaders do what is necessary to fight for young people's vote. They shouldn't just expect it. They shouldn't expect young people to do whatever is sort of necessary to participate in the system. They should campaign to young people like they campaign to anyone else. And that way, I think young people will be able to go from the sort of comfortable setting of education where, in a sense, it's a safe space for sort of developing and sharing your views, and go in and take that into our democracies too.
Okay, great. So we had, 2 doses of optimism. Rupa, sorry, do you have a microphone at the front?
Thanks. Yeah, I was just wondering to all the panellists who, of course, were brilliant and dazzling and our future is safe in their hands. I just wondered, where would you set the parameters of what youth is now, and does it shift? Because, there's this argument that 40 is the new 20 kind of thing. And, even I like to think so. Thank you.
It's not opinion, it's fact.
Exactly. And, you guys are Generation Z. I think I was X, so there must have been 2 between you and me. And then the baby boom was like from 1945 all the way to the 60s. So just, do you know what I mean? Is it a shifting thing? Where are our parameters of youth? And then again, on this point that sort of politicians maybe promise things to pensioners as they are the people who reliably turn out and vote, would compulsory voting help?
Okay, now, when you reply to this age question, be mindful of the audience here, okay? Read and look at the room, and no pressure, but yes, what... Okay, maybe start with the second question, and then we come back to the first one. Or we vote anonymously on the age thing, but yeah.
I could jump in if no one wants to give it a go. I think the age one is an interesting and sort of serious point as well, in that there are legal definitions for what qualifies as a young person, and it varies massively across the continent and across the world. I think in parts of Africa, 35 is sort of considered a young person. So I think there's massive variation. Some people would say it's a state of mind. I think it is a lot about your experience and where you are in life. I think if you're a tax-paying, employed adult, then I think you have a slightly different set of experiences. I think if you're in education or in sort of part-time employment and you're still sort of finding your way in life, then that's probably more what would maybe qualify as a young person. But I think, in a sense, the exact way we quantify it is sort of less important in a sense. But I think at the same time, it's a sort of useful category to have because it enables better sort of analysis and problem solving and how to engage certain groups of people. I think on compulsory voting, this is an interesting one. I think it is not something that would make be a positive difference, because I think you're forcing people to vote who don't want to vote, and that vote is not going to be of great value to the sort of the political system if it's not a considered vote, and it sort of defeats the whole point of voting, which is that you sort of consider what is in your interests, you vote, and hopefully you get some representatives in the system. I think what needs to be done is to try and increase the amount of people voting. And I think to do it via compulsory voting is a superficial way of sort of brushing over the fundamental underlying problems, which is that young people don't necessarily trust the political system, not least because of the ways in which our leaders sort of treat young people, and not just young people, but others more generally. And it's those problems that need to be addressed. And in doing that, I think you increase the turnout. So I think compulsory voting is a superficial way of sort of brushing aside the fundamental underlying problems.
Thank you. Yep, Kasia?
So on the first point, I completely agree that age is just a number, and I think it's wonderful not to be too attached to the labels and kind of let everyone go at their own pace. And maybe that's a very millennial/Gen Z view, but I think I kind of agree with what Tom said about that. And I just wanted to add something which is not necessarily linked to the voting, but one thing that occurred to me still regarding education that I think is missing. And it's not unique to young people, I would say. But when we were talking about having the tools and not knowing what to do with that, and also as someone with a research background, that's a bit of a chip on my shoulder, looking at the pandemic and maybe the tendency to not trust science or research. I think what would be wonderful to include more from very early years of education is critical thinking and kind of being able to digest what you're consuming and ask yourself, who's telling you this? What are they not telling you? Why are they telling you this? What is the statistical method behind this? And kind of how it is manipulated. And I think politicians are not interested in having like a society that maybe understands what is being told them, and they can kind of, divide it and see through them. So if it was up to me, I think from early years on, just have some critical thinking, included in the process.
Okay, thank you. We'll maybe take two questions that we've now received online, if that's okay, to also recognize the people that are following us on YouTube or on the online platform of the Belvedere Forum. So we have the first question from Monika Piekut about technology and its contribution to political engagement of young people. So the question is, how can technology contribute to increasing the engagement of young people in political life? And I guess that resonates well with the comments that were made here previously about the potential of digitalization and about how young people engage in sometimes outside the formal political structure. So what is the potential of technology here? I can see Pavel, yep.
I will start with the underlying that the technology is influence of the young generation, not only in a political way, but social way, as a most important thing. So I want to underline second time, because I see in the technology much more, I don't want to say negative aspects, but maybe we should call it like that, because of course we know, everybody know, and everybody agree with that technology give us a lot of opportunities, blah blah blah. There is no point to underline all this positive aspect. And that's all. This aspect is of course regarding to democracy system as well, because technology give us opportunity to communicate better and be in a group with, and realize our activist souls. But I think that we should more be concentrated on negative aspect of technology, and even though negative consequence in politics, because I think that what is the most important, for me, the most important negative aspect of the technology is giving the feel that we build something stable, something deep, but it's not deep, not stable. It's not only about the relationship by means of, as I mentioned before, but generally, if we, I have more than 10 years experience in NGOs in Poland, and my job for many years was to invite new people from the younger generation to my organization. And I'm for sure can tell you that I have a lot of meetings online and a lot of meetings offline. And my very short message is that if we communicate only online and we don't have a meeting offline, we don't have a meeting with, don't have a situation when we can face-to-face and see all our body language and you know, see all this very sensitive communicate from other peoples, we cannot build anything stable. So, of course, technology as a something which fasten any process is a good answer, but technology which replace the real meeting, the real structures, the real, you know, real emotions is something very, very dangerous. And I think that a lot of people, especially in the younger generation, don't know this difference between the role of the technology. And I think that our aim is to give the younger generation this message and help them to build something additional, build this real life. When this real life will be stable, the digital part of our activity will be something additional, not something which is negative.
Thank you. Any more takes on technology? Yeah, Robin?
I was just thinking about, like, in technology, in terms of, like, social media, I just think of the last year and Instagram being full of these squares full of, like, political information on anti-racism and homophobia. And I think it can be a good platform to energize and to be like a call for action, but I often think it's a slippery slope where it falls into like a sort of performative activism with young people where you might be like energized to like, oh, I'll share it to my story, I'll share it with my friends, but will it translate into something in person is the real question. And I think that's something that a lot of young people have been reckoning with over the last year. Is me engaging with it online actually going to translate it into action? And I think that's something to consider when we talk about technology and, you know, like activism and young people. It can be really good to be like, hey, this is an issue you should really care about and maybe you should do something about it. But actually a lot of the time when you actually look behind the scenes, a lot of these things don't get turned into actual action or don't happen. You know, I think it can be a real like balancing act with some people. Some young people just think it's good enough to retweet something or like reshare something and that's it. They've done their activism for the day, but they don't really understand that it doesn't always translate very well into real like life activism, going to protests or like, you know, helping out like in the community or like mutual aid. I think it can be good in some sense, but there is bad aspects to it. But I think that's just technology in general has good aspects and bad aspects. But I think that is something worth highlighting. You know, this like activism that's popped up in the last year with young people. You know, I think it's a worrying trend because you worry. We care enough about these causes, but do we care enough about to actually put them into action? I think that's my concern.
Thanks a lot. Yeah,
short sentence as something additional. We should remember that, you know, especially Facebook, but not only as it's not the only tool, make a real problem of polarization and the problem of bubbles when we live in. And there's a huge problem for politics, especially for politics, because, you know, 10 years ago, I see in my wall opinion that I disagree, but I see them. But now probably I didn't even see them because, you know, the algorithm works like that. I see only information that I like, that I share, and this is the problem that people cannot even confront their opinion with the other arguments. And the problem is even worse because, you know, the way of consuming information of younger generation is that most information come from social media. So social media is not a place for older generation that we transfer some knowledge, but we have knowledge from the newspapers, from the traditional media. If you consume all your information from the social media, and this social media is a bubble, that's a problem of polarization, and we see we see it in a voting system because in many countries the people who has a center opinion is limited. You know, everybody going to left, going right because of this process. So this is something that we should remember when we discuss about the technology.
Yeah, Kasia?
just very quickly also, I completely agree with what both of you said. And I think just as a very short reminder, on the flip side of using technology and social media, we've seen it in the Polish example where people have used Facebook or other platforms to organize themselves for strikes and protests, for example, which would have not been possible before. Without that, it's maybe obvious. But then also, just to comment on what you said, Pavel, I think it's not just the bubbles, but I think a lot of issues are not just black or white. And when you are doing a tweet or an Instagram post or even a TikTok, the nuance of it is lost completely. So I think that also plays a lot into the polarization, because you can do one tweet about something and then there's this sort of tribalism where people jump to conclusions about your political views about everything else, or you make a comment and there is 3 exceptions to it, but there's not enough time or characters or space to explain that. And I think especially if you consume knowledge in those snippets, and you see the kind of over-policing of social media and people who are almost on the same side and yet end up being very hostile towards each other. I think algorithms a lot and the bubbles, but also the nuance isn't there.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, I just have to discover the pleasures of a hybrid event. If you thought a Zoom event is difficult, try hybrid. So there you go. We have another question from our viewers, which is about, I think, will be more to our UK panelists. But the question is about the role of Gen Z in bringing the UK back to the EU. So is it realistic to assume that the British Gen Z could bring the UK back to the EU? So no pressure. We couldn't quite figure it out, but could you fix it for us? Is that?
I think I'm in a very interesting position here because Scotland's in a very interesting position. I mean, all you have to do is look at the Brexit vote and look at the split between general elections as well between Scotland and the rest of the UK to understand it's a very precarious situation. I think there is a lot of emotion running high in Scotland, and I think it's because we're like, oh, everybody voted this way and we voted another way and we're getting pulled along. And there is potential. I can't look into the future and say, yes, Scotland's going to go independent and decide to join the EU. I can't say that straight out. But I think there is an appetite for it, but I don't know whether that's more of a retaliation against the rest of the UK for voting the opposite way, where there's a lot of well, for me personally, there's a lot of good things about going independent, but there's also my concern that we're only going independent because we voted to remain in Brexit, rather than looking at what makes it good to go independent, what are actually the benefits of being an independent Scotland, rather than looking at, are we actually just doing this because we feel a bit miffed off by the rest of the UK, which I think it's a bit of both, honestly. Obviously, I can't really say, and I don't like to say either, because not every Scottish young person thinks the same way as me, and obviously you can kind of tell I'm a little bit more pro-independence than other people, but there's other young people that aren't for independence and they don't really care much for the European Union, but I can't honestly say from the Scottish perspective, and I don't want to say because I don't want to go and anger half the nation. I know it's only 5 million people, but there will be angry people, believe me. So that's all I'm going to say on that.
Okay, thank you. Any more replies? Tom?
I think it's unlikely, just mostly for practical political reasons. I think it's probably going to be decades at the least before the UK even thinks about returning to the European Union. And to be honest, I think it could be a little bit of an unnecessary distraction as we're trying to deal with climate change, the increasing penetration of digitalization and AI into all areas of our lives before we're really ready to govern it. There'll be more pandemics, and I think we've seen how politically difficult it has been to leave the European Union. I think it would be as difficult, if not more difficult, to rejoin. And I think our position, if we were to rejoin, would be significantly compromised, and we wouldn't have the values that we once did. So I'm not sure there's the value proposition there that there was when we first joined, and during the referendum, the value that was put for why we should remain. So I think it's unlikely. My generation might be gone by the time that happens, so I don't think we could sort of put it on us. But at the same time, I think we need to make as many connections with Europe as possible. It's in our geostrategic interest. It's in our interest in a number of other respects, I think especially for young people as well. It's critical that we maintain our connection to the European continent where possible. But the European Union for a while might be a bit of a stretch, I think.
Okay, so since we're already on this, we will maybe have another round of questions from the floor. We have time, but this connects well to what I wanted to ask you next, which was specific sort of UK-Polish context ideas and realities in terms of cooperation, not only between youth, but also affecting youth and with youth. So, for example, education. Obviously, chances are if you're in formal education, you're more likely to be within the younger age brackets. So I think it was Charles who mentioned in the previous panel, I'm usually the first person to mention it, that UK is out of Erasmus, and I think this is an incredibly damaging thing to happen. And it affects a lot of young people and their mobility opportunities and so on. You will have different experiences and takes on that, but I was wondering whether you have any specific ideas about engaging young people jointly in Polish, British initiatives or wider European initiatives. Robin, you spoke to the realities of LGBT youth in Poland. There's definitely space there for supporting groups and activists and organizations. There is that in the academia, there's that in research. If you have any ideas as to what can be done, I mean, we did mention digital or the technological advantages of cooperating across borders. Chatham House is running a wonderful initiative called Common Futures Conversations, where young people from all over the world can engage online in discussing global problems. Those kind of solutions do exist, those platforms do exist. I was wondering what your thoughts and ideas are there for closer bilateral relations involving young people from Poland and the UK in whatever areas you're working in. Any thoughts? Yeah, Paolo?
One message, but I'm not sure that I answer your question. But when we see something optimistic about the Z generation and link to the Polish and Polish and British relations, I think that we should remember about the one important thing is that all young people is socialized in the same world. So digital world is more common world because all people in young people in Poland watch the same films on the Netflix, consume the same culture, even much more than older generations. So I think that's I don't know exactly how to describe, how to explain the mindset of these people, but this mindset is very similar. Of course, there are local differences, national differences, but the common denominator, I think, is higher than in younger than older generation. So, of course, this process is linked not only regarding Polish-British relation, but Polish-German, Polish-American. That's all countries. But I think that we should remember that this is something which maybe will create our world more common, and this is something optimistic.
Thank you. Any other thoughts or ideas on this? I'm looking at you, Kasia, yes, but I'm sorry, maybe. Okay.
So I don't have anything straight away that would be very optimistic, because I think if there were easy solutions, they would have already been done. But what we have seen... Sorry? What we have seen, both looking at the Polish researchers in the UK and through conversations with Polish students in the UK, is a real disappointment of, studying in the UK has become, I guess the financial barrier is the biggest barrier there, which will end up deepening the socioeconomic divide. And even in this year, we have seen a surge of people approaching us, students saying, could we help them fundraise for fees, and so on and so forth. I am also that Polish societies in the UK have been contacted by people needing immigration advice, help sorting out their visas, or you know, it's not just the visas fees, it's the university fees, it's the health surcharge. There's a lot there. So I guess one thing that Polish people need to keep up or keep having the opportunities to study in the UK will definitely be money. Simple as that. I think it's slightly different for researchers at PhD level and later on. What we have seen in our surveys is that if people are already established in the UK, then they're probably going to stay in the UK, and Brexit is not going to affect them so much. They might be worried about an income of fresh talent if they're a team leader or a group leader, but it doesn't affect their decisions. But what we do see is that less people are applying for undergrad studies, but also PhD studies. So it's for now it's a trickle, but with years it might also become more. It might only become more visible and more clear. As I said, I don't have optimistic solutions, but one thing that has come to my mind is I know that many British universities are partnering up with Polish universities, and I think these partnerships are looking very promising, and it's also touching up a bit on what you said, Paweł, about accessibility. I guess technology could here be used also to our advantage to give opportunities to people regardless of where they are based.
Thanks, Kasia. Any other thoughts on that? Yep, Robin?
I have one optimistic thing. I think it was last year during the pandemic, I decided to join, I think it was Young Scot organised it, but it was some other organisations too working alongside it. And it was called Globetrotters, but we also called it Globe Scotters because it was Scottish people running it. It's a really terrible pun, I know. And they linked us up with young people, not just in Europe, but in Africa and elsewhere. And I got to speak with a young person from Poland, a young person from Belgium. We were all roughly the same age. And we talked about how our governments, you know, and youth represented exactly what we've been talking about in the panel today. And I just remember walking away from that event and going, wow, like there's other young people that have similar issues in similar countries. And that's the first time I've actually reckoned with that and thought about that. And I'm like, it's not just me in Scotland, it's the young guy in Belgium, it's the girl in Poland. It was like, it was one of those amazing things that I walked away and went, actually, there's a lot of similarities that we could be playing off of here for young people. And even just having that discussion, it was like totally informal. There wasn't much that came out of it. Even just having young people in a space where they can talk about issues that they're facing in their country with other young people from other countries, I think you'll find there's a lot of similarities, and that would link them up a lot better, because then you realise actually we're all facing very similar issues, maybe just in different contexts. And I think that could empower a lot of young people to think, well, if I'm having this issue and they're also having this issue, what could we do together to like face these issues together rather than doing it just within our own country? Because I think that would make us a lot stronger, but it would also empower us to deal with these issues a lot better, realising that there's other young people and that we could organise a lot better, you know, with other young people in other like countries too.
Thank you. Yeah, Tom?
Yeah, just to add one more thing. I think this is an area where the Turing scheme needs to step up, and I worry a little bit that this could be another thing to add to Boris Johnson's growing list of things that have been overpromised and under-delivered. But I think it also has potential, particularly in the sort of academic area, as has been mentioned. But we need to make sure this is something which is not just about going out to the rest of the world, but there is a focus on Europe too, which is politically inconvenient for the current government. But I think it makes perfect sense for every other reason. I think it's also really important that one of the major things I think we've lost from Erasmus, which I think is often ignored, is the funding that it gave to civil society. It's not just an education exchange program. but millions of pounds went into youth organisations across the country in the UK, and that has not been replaced by Turing. And these enabled young people to sort of mix with other people from around the world and around the continent, and also to engage in democratic processes in the UK too. So I think Turing needs to happen sooner rather than later. Not sure whether it will for a number of sort of practical and political reasons, but I think that's one thing that needs to happen. And I think the funding that Erasmus did provide to civil society needs to be replaced, and I think that will help us to build up the international connections with Poland, but other countries in Europe too.
Okay, thank you very much. I was wondering if there are any last-minute questions or comments from the floor. Yep, Colm, and there's a mic.
Thanks, Max. I'm Colm from the British Council. And I just want to build on something that Robin was saying there, and it's about the commonalities across European countries. Some of the research that we've done, next generation research that we've done in the British Council in Poland and other countries, shows us that young people in a lot of European countries are dissatisfied with the education that's being provided to them and don't recognize themselves in the governments that are ruling them. But the one kind of big piece of positivity that comes out uniformly is that there is a sense of agency, that they feel that they can change things if they channel their activism in the right direction. And it was seen in Poland last year, came through in that research very clearly. And I just wanted to ask the panel, do they think that there is a sense of agency, and when focused, can young people precipitate change in the societies that we live in?
Okay. Thank you, Colm. And any reactions to that? Okay.
Oh, I think absolutely. I think across history this is something which young people have demonstrated. I think it's something that has been seen in Poland recently, as you mentioned. I think when you look at the climate movement around the world, you can see the impact that young people have had. Ursula von der Leyen has gone on record to say the European Green Deal wouldn't exist without the climate movement, which has overwhelmingly been led by young people. I think where the traditional institutions and political systems are not necessarily set up in a way which enables young people to have their voice heard in those systems, and where there is distrust and they choose not to go down that road. When you look at the movements that young people have built from scratch in many places, I think it can only be a source of inspiration and hope for the future about what can be achieved and what could be achieved if our political systems were able to channel young people's passion and activism into traditional democratic mechanisms as well as the non-traditional, more technologically focused mechanisms. So I think absolutely young people have the capability to change the world, but there are things that we can do to better enable young people to do that. And I think when we do that, it's not just young people that benefit, but it's our countries and all our societies too.
Thank you. Pavel?
I think that the problem of education is that we all know that there is something wrong about our common education system. I think that in Poland and many other countries, but the problem is we don't know how to build the new one, and how to answer this expectation, which for me is maybe over exaggeration, because we should understand that the education system cannot give us all necessary knowledge and give us all necessary competence, which will be, that we efficiently use in our life. So we should answer this question: what's the role of the school? What's the role of the university? Of course, I know that the simple answer is this institution should learn us how to think and how to solve the problem. But everybody agree on that, general level. But the problem is how this level, how to deal with this of the operational level. And I think that it's not I don't have a simply answer, but I want to underline that everybody see that there is a problem, but I don't think the new model that everybody agree, which will be better than the previous one. And one more reflection is that we should remember that it is very attractive to expect from the school to be, catch up with our, pace of our, changing technology, society, all things. But maybe important role of education is learn something which is stable, which is something which is not changed so fast. Because when we, change the role of the school and we want to keep up the pace with our world, we always will be, not in the same pace. So we cannot achieve the satisfaction, cannot achieve the goal, but we lost something which now we learn in our education, even though this is not satisfactory and don't fulfill our all expectations. So one comment towards education system.
Thank you. Any other comments or reactions? Yep, Robin.
Just from my own personal experience, I'm the president of the LGBT society on campus, and it's a 16-person committee, which is a lot of people, I know, but it's actually 18, but we're down 2 members, and I think even we're one of the biggest societies on campus, but the amount of change that society does every year is immense. The changes we've made to make the university environment more safe and sustainable for LGBT students every year is unreal. And I think it's because there's a structure to the society that's been set up for over decades. It's it's been set up since the 70s, but it's there, it's existed in a structure, and it's always young people leading it. I'm only 20 and I'm the president, but there is other people on committee that are a little bit older than me. But we have done really good things, and the university wants to listen to us because we've managed to campaign to them to make these changes. And I think it is about having these structures where young people take charge and say, I'm going to put my foot down, I'm taking this to the university management, and they're going to have to do something about it. Young people have that determination because I see it in the society. We have over 200 people in the society, and we can be very loud. And I think over the last year, I've realized as president, we can throw our weight behind things because there's so many of us that young people can make a significant impact. And this is just on a university campus. This isn't national level, but we have implemented things that have made big changes. For example, for me, one of the biggest things that the society did before I even came to the uni was they were we want more gender neutral toilets on campus so that trans and non-binary students feel more safe. And the university basically nearly has one in every building now. They have a list of them, they put out a map, they advertise it everywhere, and they link out to our society as well. And I think it is young people can make change. It's just they've got to have the right structure to do it in, and they've got to have the right people listening to them. But also young people can be very powerful in big numbers is what I've learned. Because 200 young people, university students that are sleep deprived, that are trying to get a degree, can be very vicious and can be very good at putting their foot down. And I think that's something to think about. It's young people need a sort of structure where they can take their issue and they can get listened to, and they do have that power to organise. I see people, I think it's more likely on a university campus to organise. This is where all the student movements have come out of. University students are a very powerful force. It's just trying to get them to go in the right direction, to use that force in a good way. That's where it needs to start. What structure? You need to find a structure for it.
Thanks a lot, Robin, and thank you, Colin, for inspiring those optimistic answers. This will be the last intervention by our panelists, but just maybe to also wrap up in the here and now, rather than talking about the future. That you mentioned greater youth engagement. I think, Robin, in your opening statement, you talked about youth being sort of the new component, the diverse audience here. But even if we take Rupa's rather generous 40 is the new 20 definition of youth, we can agree that probably there is some space for greater youth involvement in this forum. And I know that Chatham has a panel of youth advisors. You have Common Futures as an online space for young people to interact. So maybe if we can use the youth potential that we already have here to identify ways of getting young people more involved in future editions of Belvedere Forum, and then to have them involved in either a steering committee in some way or in the actual delivery, and have more of them in the room, I think that would be great. With that, I will allow myself to conclude this panel. Thank you very much, Robin, Paweł, Tom, and Kasia, for your contributions and for your time. Thank you very much. And I will now